Well, it looks like it's about time to get started. This is quick training. We're going to try and do this every month, so with different topics. What we're going to cover each month will be kind of some background on Database Health Monitor. We'll cover different keyboard shortcuts. There's a lot of different things in Database Health Monitor that can be done quicker or easier by the keyboard shortcuts, so we'll cover one of those today. Cover some things that were new. We just had a new release of Database Health Monitor earlier this week. We'll go into Q&A section and then take a look at anything you'd like to learn about Database Health Monitor next time, and then take a look at some coupons and discounts and coupon codes as well for the Database Health Monitor class. To jump into it, a little bit of history of Database Health Monitor. Doesn't feel like it's been 11 years that I've been working on it, but it has been. Started in 2011. Working with a guy who said, you should take all these queries that you're using to manage the database all the time and put them into some useful tool that will work that other people can use and share to do the things we do to manage the database. So I originally prototyped it using SQL Server reporting services. And that was kind of cool in the beginning, but then we found out it wasn't really as flexible as we needed it to be able to connect to multiple SQL servers and do different monitoring and different comparisons. So from there, we went with over the next year, developing it into what was the initial beta release, which was regular Windows desktop application. That launched in 2012, and through 2012 to 2014, continued the beta, doing releases every 2 to 3 months, just keeping on updating things. And then in 2015, we released it as a free product. It was out of beta, ready and available for everyone. And then 2016 through 2022, we've just been adding features, building the product, fixing bugs, making it stronger and stronger, working with different environments. In 2021, we added an online class, which we'll talk about in the end, but it's a way that you can get training on Database Health Monitor. And then in 2022, we added a paid licensing and gamification program. Prior to that, everything had been totally free. After 10 years at that point, or I guess just the beginning of 11 years of working on it, I realized I was at the point that I could no longer commit the time I needed to keep this going without getting some kind of return out of it. Through 2022, we've been adding new features and growing the product there. Just wanted to talk a little bit about the licensing because this was new, introduced in January of this year. The way the product is licensed is there's this concept of connection points, where if you have 5 SQL servers that you regularly connect to with Database Health Monitor, you're going to want 5 connection points. If you have 50 SQL servers, you'll want 50 connection points. Basically, each connection point gives you the ability to connect to SQL servers. Each point represents a concurrent connection. Now, you might look at it and think, well, can I just with one connection, just connect and disconnect from all different SQL servers? Yeah, you could do that, and you could manage hundreds of SQL servers with one connection point. But that's difficult because you're always connecting and disconnecting rather than keeping it open and being able to monitor everything in one integrated environment. The way that you can get connection points, there's a number of different ways to do this. And there are some free options here for a small number of connections. But if you're a current subscriber on my mailing list, you get 1 server connection. If you're an ongoing customer of Stedman Solutions, someone we're regularly doing business with on an ongoing basis, you get 40 server connections. And for those ongoing customers, anyone who needs more than that, we usually will up that number if they want it. If you enroll in the Database Health Monitor training course that I mentioned earlier, that gives you 20 server connections, and that's a yearly renewal you have to do there. Or if you're in other Stedman Solutions training courses, which we offer many, you get 2 server connections. Purchasing a mentoring package in the last 2 years, you get 2 server connections. Or if someone wants to create a blog post promoting Database Health Monitor, they get 10 server connection points. Or, and this is the common one that a lot of people will go for, the unlimited 5-year license for $19.99. So almost $2,000 plus tax gives you unlimited number of connections for a 5-year basis. And if you want more detail on that, you can go to stedman.us/points. So we're going to take a look at a keyboard shortcut next. Now, in Database Health Monitor, there's lots of different keyboard shortcuts, but what we're going to look at here is the backspace key. And this is useful if you're you're clicking around on different areas. You might click here and drill down on this report and then that report. Oh, this is kind of a boring database I clicked on. Once you've done that, the backspace key, basically everything you click through sort of goes into a stack. In order to go back, you can just use the backspace key to go to the previous report, the previous one before that, and the previous one before that. And you can just keep using the backspace key to go all the way back to where you started. So it's a pretty handy way when you're navigating around in different reports and things to be able to jump back to where you just were. Another useful way to use it is when you're doing drill down on different reports. If you're clicking through from one to the next, it's a good way to be able to just go back to where you were before that. There's this little, oh, it's kind of slow there. One of the things is I'm running over a Starlink internet connection via satellite tonight, so it's a little bit slow when I'm connecting to this computer, which is at my home. I'm away from my house right now. As you're going through different parts of the product, this gray window down in the bottom left here will show you different keyboard shortcuts or different tips you're clicking about. Moving on from the keyboard shortcuts, yeah, that backspace key is just super handy. Next, we'll go on to some demos of something new. Now, earlier this week, we came out with the November 2022 release. That's version 1005 of Database Health Monitor. And there are a number of new features that were added in this release. The first one I want to show is new columns for clustered index size and non-clustered index size on the table sizes report. To view that, we'll jump back over to Database Health Monitor. We'll scroll down, we'll go pick a different database that's maybe a little bit more interesting. We'll look at the table size report. And in this report, you get a list or it shows you the size of the tables up top as a sort of a tree view type graph. But when we look at a specific row down here, the right two columns were new. They were added with this. It's a handy way to look and say, oh, here's this table right here. It has 0 bytes for the clustered index and a non-clustered index is 12 megabytes. That tells me that there is no clustered index on that table because the whole table's taking up 1.4 megabytes. That's a small table, but it's a quick way to see how big the clustered index or the table itself compares to the size of the clustered indexes that are on that table. Or a quick way, as you can see with several of these that I'm clicking on right here, to see which tables are missing a clustered index. Another thing we did in this version was I upgraded from .NET or upgraded to .NET Framework 4.8 and Visual Studio 2022. There's nothing really to demo on that or nothing specific that I can just point out and show you, here's how it's different. But the point with that is I'm keeping up to date with the latest versions of the .NET Framework and Visual Studio so that we're able to maintain the product going forward. Other things that were added on the quick scan checks for SQL Server 2012 beyond end of life, because not long ago SQL Server 2012 hit the point that it's no longer directly supported. I added a check in the quick scan report for backups to null. This came after working with a client where we realized that they were actually doing regular backups and they thought they had good backups, but instead of backing up to a file, they were backing up to null, which meant their backups really didn't exist. That's one of those things that's really, if somebody's doing that, it's really easy to kind of not notice it. So it's been added to the quick scan. We'll check that and just change the link to get help to be HTTPS instead of HTTP, and added a check for untrusted foreign keys in any database on the system. Let's go ahead and take a look at the quick scan report. And the way you get to that is in the tree view on the left-hand side of the screen, you're going to click on your SQL Server instance name. In this case, it was Steve18/SQL 2019. We're going to go on the gray buttons in the middle of the screen and click on the one called Quick Scan Report. And what the quick scan does is it goes out and analyzes a whole bunch of different best practices and what I'd like to consider known gotchas, or things that I've got caught on over the years. And it comes back and it gives you a report of things that you think, or that it thinks you may want to consider, you may want to take a look at. I'm not running 2012, so we can't see the 2012 beyond end of life message. We don't have any backups to null, so we can't see those. But if that was happening, they would show here. But what we can see is that there are untrusted foreign keys showing up in these databases. For those who aren't familiar with untrusted foreign keys, or maybe not even foreign keys at all, what a foreign key is, it's a constraint that goes on a table that identifies other tables that it's associated with it, or a specific ID value that's being linked to from another table. There's different types. There's sort of the implicit foreign key or the sloppy foreign key, where people don't even have foreign keys at all, and you just know from the business knowledge that this ID in one table is the same as an ID in another table. There's what SQL Server has as foreign keys, which is a constraint that makes it so that in the table definition, those foreign keys are linked. And then there's also, with that, there's two options. There's what's called an untrusted or a trusted foreign key. And if you have an untrusted foreign key, what that means is that the foreign key is not enforced. What that means is that you can have values in one table that don't match up with keys from the other table. But if you have a trusted foreign key, those have to always match up. And one of the things you can get, and why the untrusted or trusted foreign keys is so important, is that if you're doing a join between two tables simply to determine if a value exists, well, oftentimes the SQL Server Query Optimizer can skip looking at that other table if it's a trusted foreign key, because it knows that only things in that other table that match what's in this table can exist. That's one of those things related to performance that by making the foreign key trusted can end up with improved performance. And this is one of those that kind of falls through the cracks. I mean, there's databases where people have foreign keys, they think they're enforced, but they're not. And checking this and enabling those. Now, I want to caution you, before you go in and enable that constraint to be a trusted foreign key, you need to first make sure that there's no values in the other table that don't match the first table. Okay, other things that were new in this release of Database Health Monitor are the backup status instance report. We added columns for notes, which display warnings on various items, added last backup file column, and added the warning for backups to null, like we talked about before, and double-click functionality to drill down on the specific backups for that database. Let's take a look at that. I'm going to use the backspace key that we talked about earlier. That's going to jump me back to the main port for that instance. I could have got there by clicking on the instance name in the tree view. Then we're going to look at the gray buttons in the middle of the screen down here, and we're going to click on the backup status report, the first of the gray buttons on the left side here. And that's going to go out and look at all the databases I have on here. And this is my test server, so there's a bunch of wacky stuff here, but I really like to make sure that we are backing it up regularly. And in here, this existed before, but the notes column over here and the last full backup file on the right side were added. And this is where, if you were doing things like backup to null, the notes would be displayed there, or other errors or warnings may be displayed in that notes column. And then over here, it shows the full backup file that was added to prevent places where you're going to be backing up to null. It's also a good way to go and see where is that last full backup going to. And one of the things that I find with this report oftentimes is that if I'm looking at SQL Server backups and somebody has a virtual machine backup that's taking a snapshot, or they have some other appliance that's doing snapshots. The other thing I wanted to point out here on what's new What's new is today, Microsoft released SQL Server 2022. For the last many months that SQL Server 2022 has been going through its whole release process, Database Health Monitor has been tested on all those pre-release versions or those release candidates or community technology previews along the way. So we know that Database Health Monitor will work with SQL Server 2022 just as well as it works with any of the other versions of SQL Server. That wasn't originally part of my presentation, but with Microsoft releasing that today, I thought I would point that out. Another thing that's new in this update that came out this week was more security check features and best practices. Now, this slide, I feel a little bit silly putting it together this way. I don't expect you to go through and be able to read all of these here, but I will show you a demo of how that works. And if we take a look, we go back to the top level for this SQL Server instance. We click on the security tab, security button on the gray buttons in the middle of the screen underneath the quick scan report. What this is going to do is go out and scan your SQL Server for a number of best practices around locking down your SQL Server and making it more secure to prevent you from getting hurt in different types of attacks, from ransomware to pure straight up hack or viruses and things like that. There's different things, like there's an option you can turn on login auditing, so you know everybody that's logged in, both successful and unsuccessful logins to your system. These are all things as we go through them that are just recommendations for the most secure environment. They may not apply for your system, or you may decide that, yeah, we only want to log those failed logins. That's okay. It's just here to tell you about it. Here it's pointing out that transparent data encryption is not enabled. Well, it used to be that to use transparent data encryption that you had to have SQL Server Enterprise Edition. But with SQL Server 2019 and newer, you can use TDE or transparent data encryption on SQL Server Standard Edition as well. And what this is, it encrypts the files on the disk, or at rest as they call them. And then when the files are loaded and pages of data are loaded into memory, they get decrypted at that point. So if somebody was to steal your data files, they would be encrypted and they couldn't use them. It's just one of those secure things. And these are all different checks that are being run against my test server here locally. Another one that it's failing on is that my server allows unencrypted connections. Now, that's a thing you can set up in the SQL Server Configuration Manager to say that the server will only accept encrypted connections. And when you go to connect to a database, there's usually an option to go in and say encrypt connection when you're connecting. If this option is turned on, this will make sure that all traffic between any client and that SQL server is being encrypted. Other things that it's finding here is that things like orphan users, those can be a security concern. Ad hoc distributed queries is set to 0. That's an important one to set to 0 to prevent remote procedure calls from calling into your server. Ensure auto close is set to off on contained databases. These are just a number of different checks here that each one of them, and some of them I've included links here to more detail on it. Things like ensure that hide instance option is set to yes for production SQL servers. Well, that makes it a little bit harder for some bad actor who gets into your environment to be able to scan and find all of your SQL servers. Now, most of these are not things that just by doing any one of them that it's going to make your system extremely secure, but a combination of all of these together is really what goes into locking down your servers. And this was a list that I worked on as part of working with a client on doing a very robust server lockdown process. And I was able to just script all of this out so that we can now, every time we work on their servers, use this to scan them and confirm that all of these things are compliant, rather than questioning or wondering if they're still set the way we set them to be set 2 months ago. If anybody's done a DoD project, Department of Defense, where you have to do STIGs, which are the government's version of locking down servers, A lot of the things in the STIGs are very common to what's being shown in this list here, that they want to lock servers down. Or if you've done a PCI audit, which is part of credit card processing, oftentimes they're asking for very similar things with those as well. These securities checks are a good thing to be doing on your SQL server. Before I get into Q&A, I want to take a look at another feature here. And again, I'm running over a satellite connection to this computer right now, so it's a bit slow. But what I want to take a look at while we're here in the demo as well is our historic wait monitoring. That's these blue bars across the top on each of the server instances. If we click down below on my laptop, which is the computer we're running on right here, the bar chart is very different because I don't have a lot of load, test load, or anything running on the server. But if we go back here to the SQL, to this other server, we're going to take a look at the waits. And what wait stats are, is it's one of those things that anytime SQL Server is stuck waiting, it logs these metrics so that you can analyze and know what's going on. For instance, if the server is waiting because it's bound on CPU, it's going to log a different wait event than if it's bound on memory. Or if it's waiting on I/O from a disk, it's going to be different than if it's waiting on blocking. So what I'm going to do is click on the historic waits here. Drill down on a day. We're going to look at 11/14. And we can see, well, what times of the day were the most waits being experienced on the SQL server? And when we look at this, we can see that at 4 a.m. was the biggest spike, a little spike at 5 a.m., and then at 7 a.m. there was another spike as well. And if we look down below, we can see the things that had the most waits associated with them were things like CheckDB and backups and other jobs like that. If we click on, well, let's find out what was going on in the 7 a.m. hour, we can click here, and we can see that whatever was blocking between 7 and 7:05 and about 7:12 a.m. And if we look at it, it's the SPOA method, which is one of those processes that I use for a web service call. And I know that at the time that that was happening, the server on the other end that this was calling through to with that web service call was having difficulty. So we could see that it was waiting on, and this preemptive OS get proc address is a wait type that says it's waiting on something that called out to the operating system, and that's calling out to do a web service call. If we go back and look at a bigger time range here, maybe we drill down on October 26th, we can see, well, what was happening on that day. If we drill down, let's say the 9 o'clock hour, 9 a.m., we can see here that, yeah, there's a little bit of traffic overall, but right around 9:57, something was a little bit higher. We can zoom in on that, and we can see that the biggest thing that was going on there was XP delete file. Again, this part here, I didn't rehearse at all. I'm just going and picking random days and drilling down to find out there. But what XP delete file is, it's the command that's oftentimes used when you're running normal SQL Server backups, and it's going out after it does the backups to scan and figure out what are the old backup files that need to be cleaned up or deleted over time. And that same thing, preemptive OS get proc address, that's when it's calling out to the operating system to say, hey, go and delete these files. If that's your only wait type, well, I'm not too concerned with that, but there's others. Let's see if we can go pick another one here that's something more interesting. Like if we look here, update issues history, we can double click down below. That query, I recognize that as a stored procedure that I wrote. The wait type is CX consumer and CX packet. And you can see here that over time, it had, and these are on a daily basis, October 30th, 31st, that these wait types, and the CX packet and CX consumer are waits that are associated with parallelism. That can happen because it's doing a lot of work or just because it's a big query. we can see that there was a point here on November 10th where things changed dramatically on this specific query. And that was me going in and finding the right index, adding an index in order to be able to speed that one up so it would run faster. Now, for the days that go forward from there up till today, the amount of weights associated with that query are much smaller than we've seen over time. Now, one of the things I'll do when I'm doing performance tuning is I'll go back here and look, and I'll keep this historic data, right? On this server, I keep 1 month, but I like to keep on production servers to keep 4 or 5 or 6 months of data here, so that when we go back, we can go look at the overall chart. Here, we're just seeing 1 month. I think I've kind of messed it. Okay, 1 month by, hold on, I got it out of the wrong time frame here. There we go. It's 1 month by day, and you can see that this trend on a daily basis, there were a couple days in there that were a pretty big spike, but overall the trend has been fairly level to maybe slightly down. This is one of those things that I will watch, and if I deploy a code change or do an update or maybe change some indexes, I'll watch this and I want to see these weights going down versus going up. When you see them going up, that means that your queries are taking longer to run. The SQL Server is waiting on more things for them to run, and it's just taking a lot more time there. So that is one of the other features. That's not a new feature. The other ones I showed were all new, but that's just one of the standard features that's been part of Database Health Monitor since almost the very first version that I built. Okay, so that's kind of the quick overall demo there. At this point, I want to open it up and see, does anybody have any questions that I can answer? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or type in the chat if you have a question you'd like answered. Tim's asking, can I go back to licensing? There we go. Yes, let's do that. Really, there's two categories, or there's really three categories here that I want to talk about on licensing. One is you get a couple of connections or a few connections for free by being a mailing list subscriber, and that's intended to be free for ongoing basis for one or two servers. The other is you're an ongoing regular customer with Stedman Solutions, and at that point, Database Health Monitor is there for you to use at whatever you need it to use, because we value our ongoing customers, and we don't need to make more money by selling a product to them when we're already making money doing ongoing work for them. And then there's the other category, which is people who are not ongoing customers, but they need to use it for more than a couple of SQL Server connections. For those people, there's a couple of different licensing options here. One is the unlimited 5-year license for $19.99. So $2,000 for 5 years for unlimited connections, and that's on a per user basis. Let me bring up my web browser here really quick, and I can show a little bit more information on that. If we go to stedmansolutions.com and we look at the store, here we have the Database Health Monitor 5-year unlimited per user license for $2,000, like we mentioned below. And then we also have the 1-year unlimited per user license. We originally only were doing the 5-year plan, but somebody came and said for budgetary purposes, they need to be able to only buy it on a yearly basis. So that's when I put together this 1-year unlimited per user license basis. Those are two ways to buy it. Just here's paying cash or paying a credit card, and you get Database Health Monitor. Through the Stedman SQL School is the other way to get licensing, where if you go and purchase for $99 a year, the Database Health Monitor class, that will get you up to 20 SQL Server licenses for $99 a year, which is really, really cost effective compared to other options. Or there's different bundles. You can get Database Health Monitor with coaching, Database Health Monitor with a blocking query monitor. I guess any of those three in that row there get you Database Health Monitor licenses for up to 20 SQL Server connections. So that's what's kind of covered here with the enroll in the training course. If you're at a point where you just need a couple of server connections, you can enroll in one of our other training courses and get a couple more connections. Transitioning it from a free product where I realized there was no way I could keep up with the maintenance, doing it all on my own, to paid product. We've tried to do it in a way that we keep it free for the small users, and then there's different ways to pay for it over time. And the most cost-effective way is usually the Database Health Monitor training course, because with that, you also get classes that teach you how to use it. Things like what we've covered today, but in much more detail. I know I kind of went on for a while there on licensing, but does that answer what you were looking for there? Just another note, I mean, one of the things that we also do at Stedman Solutions is we will do SQL Server performance assessment or SQL Server health assessment. And when we do those type of projects, Database Health Monitor is included in it, and usually included for several months after that for the client to use. If they decide to become a long-term customer, then that person falls into they get to use it indefinitely. But if that assessment or that project is all we do for that customer, then they're at a point where several months out, when that initial part expires, then they're in a position where you need to buy one of the licenses or one of the packages going forward. Hopefully that covers everything on licensing. Any other questions? Well, I've got a couple other things to cover.
Hey, Steve, it's Sean.
Hey, Sean.
Hey, I was just wondering, like, how do you install it? And, you know, I have customers that have these SQL servers, and I don't know if you remember when we were talking, that a lot of them are not doing a very good job of backing them up or, you know, doing anything.
Yep.
And I'm thinking about, you know, installing this for them and, you know, running a health report on that and then showing it to them. What do I need to install it?
Okay, so
like as far as rights and all that is what I'm.
Yep. So if you go to databasehealth.com, there's the download. You just click on this little green box here, go to the download page, and then there's a link that says download now, and that'll take you to a sign up form that gets you the download. Once you downloaded that, you get a zip file with an installer in it, and you can take that and put it on your laptop. And if you're working with different clients, you can, if you have a VPN connection or whatever your normal connection type is to connect to them, you can connect to their SQL server, basically anywhere that you would normally use.
Oh, just like SSMS or something. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, exactly. If you can connect there with Management Studio, you can connect there with Database Health Monitor. Now, when there's a couple of features, like when you first connect, you don't have access to this server, the historic monitoring that shows up top with the blue bars there. What you'll get instead will be a box that says historic monitoring is not yet installed. Click here to turn it on.
Okay.
And when you click there to turn it on, what it does is it goes and it creates a database called DB Health History that it uses to track that information over time. And it uses, and if we go look, we might as well just use the tool to look at what's here. It creates a number of tables. Then it creates a SQL Server agent job that runs a couple times a minute that just goes and does a quick sample of what's running, and then it logs it into these tables. And the data gets compacted over time. So you can see for a whole month's worth of data here, the biggest table we're looking at is 19 megabytes. Again, this is on a test server. It might be a little bit bigger on production if it's a busy server, but it compacts the information over time so it doesn't keep as much granularity. So even if you have a year of information here, it's not going to be 12 times as big as keeping 1 month worth of data. You just use it on your desktop. A lot of the times I'll be working with a client where the SQL connection is not accessible over a VPN where I have to then I jump with remote desktop to their environment and work there. In those cases, I'll install Database Health Monitor right on the server or right on whatever the jump box is that I'm working off of.
Okay, yeah, I have a couple of those. So.
Yep. And it really depends. So once you've got the license, so right here it says standard license for unlimited instances. That's because I've set it up as though I have a paid license, but it'll start up and it'll say, this is your license for so many and so many users. And if you put in your email address, your email address is associated with the licensing, then that will check to see if you're on the mailing list or if you're on one of those other ways that we have of getting the different points there.
Okay, cool.
So, thank you. Yeah, one company that we worked with, they were actually in Iceland and they were a consulting firm. And they ended up buying the unlimited license and they take that and use it on all their different clients with that because they're using it to connect to their clients. So,
yeah, that's
and
cool.
Being a consultant and understanding what it's like to be a consultant, I know the difficulty of having to pitch to every client to say, well, we're here to help you, but we want to buy this other set of tools. And that's originally why I bought this, was it was just too hard to pitch to go buy Redgate or different tools like that did some of the similar type monitoring. It was easier just to say, well, here, we're going to use this in your environment. We're not going to charge you anything extra for it as long as you're an ongoing customer.
Yeah, that's kind of my thinking.
Yeah. Okay. Hopefully that helps and answers the question there.
Yep. Thanks.
All right. So then if you were to come back next month and be part of this again, we're going to try and this is our first month of doing this type of lesson, but we're going to try and do this every month. Is there anything that you would be interested in seeing next time that you're curious about Database Health Monitor that's maybe not just a quick question now, but you'd like to have demoed? Instead of leaving it hanging with awkward silence there, how about if there is something you think of, just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to include different topics in the next time we do this. Now, one of the things I wanted to share, November is kind of our crazy class sales month. And one of the things that has not been publicly announced prior to the screen being shown to you right now is this bundle of Database Health Monitor and our track blocking queries product, which are normally $150 a year combined. The bundle together is 30% off right now, and that's good through November 25th. And then after that, we'll have some other Thanksgiving sales on other classes. But if you are interested in that, the link is stedman.us/bundle30. And if you go there, I will.
And with that bundle, you still get the 20 server connection points, right, Steve?
Absolutely, yes. So with that bundle, you're getting in to get both of these products combined. The track blocking queries with email alerts, that is a class that teaches you how to install it. It's a script I've written and it's basically sold through there. But the idea is it's 30% off of those combined. So it's almost like you're paying the Database Health Monitor price and getting this other thing for free with that discount, if you look at it that way. That stedman.us/bundle30 is part of our coming up on Thanksgiving crazy product sales. If you're interested, that's probably one of the more cost-effective ways to get into it for up to 20 SQL Server connections. So, any other questions or anything at this point? Hopefully everyone's found something of value in this presentation. I'm thinking next month that when we do this, I'll plan to do, I think my timing on the training part of it went a little bit shorter than I expected, but we'll plan to do a little bit more in-depth training next time. That wraps it up. If there's no questions, have a good night. And if there's anything that comes up as a question after the fact, feel free to email me and I can follow up at that point. All right. Have a great,
Great. Thanks, Steve.
great night, everyone. Yep.
Yeah, have a great
See ya.
night. Bye.
Bye.